Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Growth podcast. I'm your host, Bill Hupp, joined as always today by my co-host, Mike Haldane, the founder and principal at MarketWise Advising. Mike, how have you been?
I've been great, Bill. Thank you.
We're delighted to be joined by another guest on today's episode, and that guest is Julia Teske, the marketing manager at CalSense. She's got the overall responsibility for marketing at that company. And as Mike has described offline, one of the best marketers he's ever been around. Julia, wonderful to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for taking some time for us.
Thank you so much, Bill. It's great to be here.
Why don't we begin, as we always begin, by giving the listeners a little bit of background on your work experience, your educational experience, and just sort of how you got to the position you're in.
My educational background is actually in environmental studies, and I, found that going to Cal State San Marcos. And in my last semester of college, I was looking for an internship to try to figure out what the heck I was going to do. And I came across an opportunity for a marketing internship with CalSense. And mind you, I really had just enough quote unquote marketing experience with some of the part-time jobs that I was doing throughout college to what I like to say talk my way into the internship. And as it turns out, that internship turned into a full-time role, and I have been there ever since.
Can you just talk in general about how you pull together the marketing plan for each year at CalSense?
The marketing plan is a key part of everything we're doing, from the macro scale of the whole year, really down to our day-to-day. The process starts in September, October timeframe for us, and I start with consulting leadership and sales. Leadership from the perspective of the overall business goals, because we want the marketing plan to align with those, and the sales team to better understand their goals and their needs and how marketing can support those. There's two parts for me in the marketing plan. There's a document with the strategy and the tactics, and then there's a whole separate document that I like to keep for the budget. That just helps me to align the budget with the activities and the resources that we need. Once I pull together kind of a version one, I bring that back to leadership and sales. That way we can review, everything that we had talked about in kind of the planning stages. Are we seeing that come together within this version one? That way we have something for the beginning of the year. And, we're going to go back and, of course, update and revise as we go. But that's the initial pulling it together plan stages for the marketing plan.
And of course, every marketing plan has objectives that you're trying to achieve. What objectives are you typically trying to achieve with your marketing promotion efforts?
Our main objective of the promotion side of the plan is really lead generation. We're doing this through several channels like advertisements, email marketing, events, trade shows, and partnering with associations.
So, Julia, you talked a little bit about lead generation, and you and I over the years have talked a lot about awareness and credibility as well. And I think the way that we've talked about it has been in terms of, if you think about marketing, the 4 Ps of marketing, those being product, price, place, and promotion. We're talking today about the promotion part, the promotion P of marketing, and specifically you're talking about lead generation. But do you want to talk a little bit about awareness and building credibility as well, and what that means to you and how it fits into the mix?
Definitely. Awareness and credibility and lead generation, I think of almost the pillars of promotion. Awareness being how aware your audience is of the brand and your offerings, and the credibility side of your reputation of the brand. And those two aspects help to get your message out there. And those, for me, kind of funnel into that third element of the lead generation. The more credibility, the more awareness you have, I have found it easier to funnel into your lead generation efforts, like what we were just saying with email campaigns and events.
And how about on the credibility side, in terms of, some of the things that you do tactically to build credibility of the organization? And I'm thinking about things like, case studies and byline articles and, PR work and that sort of thing. But what are some of the things that you've seen that you've done that have been most successful in terms of building the credibility of the organization?
Thought leadership has been a big part of that. As you mentioned, case studies. This is an interesting one specifically for CalSense because last year we were trying to think of a way to put together really compelling case studies. And we came up with the idea to do a series that we're calling Champions of Irrigation. This was such a cool way for us to put together a story where we're covering a lot of the same content that is in a traditional case study, but it was a way for us to highlight individuals at a customer's organization and show how they're leveraging our technology, but also doing something really amazing for their individual organization.
Yeah, I've been witness to some of that work, and it really has. It's brought the personality, I think, into the case study, which is really interesting. It has, facts and figures and all of that, but it also has a story to tell,
Mhm.
which I think is a critically important part of the success of that. So, Julia, as we've talked about, plans oftentimes adjust throughout the year. Can you spend just a minute talking about what you've seen there and how you've dealt with it?
Yes, I always say that it's not a marketing plan if it doesn't change throughout the year. And we have to make adjustments. And this is because of the feedback that we're getting. This could be from the quantitative data that we're pulling from the activities or the qualitative data where the feedback from the team on certain activities or resources. And so we take that feedback and we are maybe reprioritizing or shifting things around within the marketing plan. It also may adjust because of budget changes. Sometimes the number that we start out with for the beginning of the year isn't the same number that we have mid-year or quarter to quarter. So there's always little adjustments that we have to make, but it's a great document between those two pieces, sort of the strategy and tactics and the budget side, because it's a very dynamic plan.
Julia, let's talk about prioritization, knowing, of course, that budgets are limited. So, how do you determine what gets funded and what doesn't?
When trying to decide what gets funded and what doesn't, I'm thinking about budgets from two different perspectives. From a monetary perspective, but also a time perspective. We only have so much time in a day, and we only have so many people to work on this plan. So we want to make sure that the activities and the resources that we're using have the greatest impact. There's two key things that I'm looking at when deciding what gets funded. The first is the long-term goal impact. I have to consider the impact of each activity for the long term and assess how dropping a certain initiative, for example, a association membership maybe that we have held, let's say, for the last few years, and we've built really great relationships, and we have this long-term goal of achieving something with that association. There's risk in dropping that because of budget. The second aspect is historical ROI. This one's pretty straightforward because we're just evaluating what the return on investment has been in the past. Thinking of this is, maybe it's a trade show that we have historical data of the success of that trade show. So then between trade show A and trade show B, we can look back on that and decide which one is worth the reinvestment.
That's a great way to look at this. And you and I have had many conversations around lead source and being sure that we can quantify that wherever possible. And you mentioned qualitative feedback as well. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking about trade shows, for example. Um, it feels like sometimes those are a little bit harder to get quantitative information from, but there's always a pretty good feeling on the part of the team that attended as to whether it was worthwhile from an awareness, credibility, lead generation standpoint. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Trade shows are a pretty important part of our lead generation efforts. That process for us looks like pulling together the team that's attending the trade show. I like to do a pre-show meeting. That just gives us a chance to all get together in a meeting and discuss, what the goals are for that event. I can also do some logistics, make sure everyone has their travel accommodations set and they have all of the, physical things that they need for that event. Set the expectations. And then during the show, they are collecting leads from this, but they also have a few things to keep in mind that we had covered from that pre-show meeting of, maybe I'm looking for feedback on our booth design or the placement of the booth. So in the after of the event, we do a debrief meeting. And this allows us, again, just that space within a meeting to how successful or maybe some challenges that came up in that event. So that feedback is really the qualitative part of the event and helps us to paint a full picture because of course we have a certain number of leads that we got out of that, but there's also so many other factors that go into a trade show, whether it was the placement of the booth, maybe it was the staff of the event that made it, an awesome event. So we're trying to paint the full picture in order to make informed decisions moving forward.
Yeah, I love that you're doing the debrief at after the show because that is such an important component of measuring the success and then using whatever data comes back from that debrief, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, using that to be able to inform what happens the next time around. And I just think that's a great best practice. So thanks for sharing that. Julie, I want to talk a little bit about what you found in terms of most effective ways to manage the budget itself. So I know you're looking at things kind of in real time and probably doing updates on a monthly basis or so. But can you talk about how you I guess from a tactical standpoint, how you manage the ins and outs of the budget?
The most effective things that I have found in managing the budget is to set very clear intent of what we're spending money on and making sure that it aligns back to the marketing plan. Then, as you said, tracking this very closely. I like to look at the budget at the beginning of the month and the end of the month. That's kind of the bare minimum to compare the planned expenses with the actual expenses. But that being said, there are all kinds of things that can come up, unexpected expenses that we have decided are important. And so I go back in and I make sure that that is always up to date.
Yeah, and I know from experience with you that you have also been very close. You've stayed very close with finance to be sure that you're continually aligned with that organization within the company. So, can you talk a little bit about how you've done that? Because I know that you've done that and you've made sure that we're never in a situation where we've overspent the budget, which can happen.
Absolutely. And I think communication is the biggest theme here. When I say that I review the budget at the beginning and the end of the month, even those in between times, finance is always in the loop on that. We really want to avoid any surprises um, for finance, by just keeping up that constant communication. It's always on the radar. That
Yeah.
way, I can validate those expenses that are on the report that I'm pulling. Um, I can alert finance if there's that unexpected expense that comes up. But this communication really just helps to build a very strong relationship between marketing and finance.
Well, I know that our finance listeners are going to love to hear this part of the story. So thank you for sharing that.
And it doesn't have to be complicated when it comes to that communication. This doesn't have to be some formal meeting that you're doing at the beginning and the end. It's like just quick emails or Teams messages that you can send to give your finance team a heads up about stuff.
Julia, can you talk a little bit about how you've implemented sprint planning into managing the promotion effort?
Absolutely. Um, the sprint planning is kind of interesting because, like I mentioned at the beginning, I started out just as a marketing intern. And as an intern, you are trying to absorb as much as you can, getting into kind of the real world of business. One of my goals was to sit in on every department's staff meeting. And when it came to the engineering team, I was so inspired by their sprint planning. I loved that there was this specific time period. For engineering, it was 3 weeks. As it had evolved for marketing, I do it within a 2-week sprint. But it was this at a glance 2-week time period where I had a list of tasks that all contribute to, sometimes it's day-to-day tasks, sometimes it's just a small piece of a larger project. But this sprint plan allowed me to keep track of that. We could assign, tickets or tasks to individual team members. So there's this great element of accountability within the team. And then lastly, the reporting aspect of it. It made it so easy to pull together this report of, the percentage of tasks done within that sprint and make it very easy to send it out to other key departments for them to digest what marketing was working on.
And what have you found helpful in terms of, you just sort of alluded to it, but we found helpful letting your organization know what is happening from a marketing promotion standpoint? I mean, how are you getting buy-in from the rest of the team so that everyone's understanding exactly what you're doing as a department and what kind of value you're bringing to the company?
What I've found most helpful is that by sending this report to key departments, is that I've gotten such good and varied feedback from people outside of marketing. A lot of the efforts that we're doing closely relate to other departments. And so to give them this transparency has sparked feedback and just great ideas from people that they're not in those weekly check-ins within marketing, that it gives them just a great way to get this overview and share ideas.
Yeah, I've watched Julia put this into place, and I can't emphasize enough how important it's been. She mentioned communication and how key that is. And then she talked a little bit about transparency a minute ago. That is absolutely critical, both for the purpose of getting feedback from people who may not normally be in a position to be able to provide it, or even in some cases where they're not asked to provide it. That feedback from all directions is critically important for a well-informed plan. And the other part of it is what you said, Bill, which is, the organization wants to know what the marketing team is up to and what the events are and what they should be planning for and talking with customers about and that sort of thing. And the report out that she's talking about is a great way to accomplish that, because generally it goes to if not the entire company, most of the company, certainly anyone who has a customer-facing role, with the idea being that they're informed and therefore they're able to communicate beyond the four walls what we have going on. So it's worked extremely well, and Julia has pulled it off with grace. So, Julia, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about marketing automation. And I know, just from our experience over the past few years, you've led the charge as far as putting marketing automation into place and to figure out ways to get the value out of it and that sort of thing. But could you just talk a little bit about what you've seen work well and maybe what hasn't worked so well?
I have worked with marketing automation just over the last couple years, and even with, I mean, it's a short period of time, I feel like I've only just dipped my toes into everything that marketing automation can do. There's a few things that I've seen work well, and one of those big ones is the email automation side of things. If you take the time to set up that process and establish the criteria for your prospects, it's amazing to watch the email campaigns and that follow-up, the cadence, move your prospect from a marketing qualified lead into a sales qualified lead. Now, on the other hand, something I've seen not work so well is if that marketing automation software isn't communicating with the sales software, especially if they are two different softwares. There's a lot of software that does a combination of marketing and sales, but from the parts that work well, where you're able to smoothly transition a prospect from sales to marketing, I've seen it hit some roadblocks if those two elements aren't communicating from a software perspective.
Right. So what you're talking about is the integration between the marketing automation software and the CRM. So, as example, we might, HubSpot would be one of the more popular marketing automation software packages, or Marketo, something like that. And then they would need to integrate to be completely effective with NetSuite or Salesforce or what have you on the CRM side. That's the point that you're making, correct?
Right, right.
Otherwise, you wind up with two disparate systems, and you've got redundancy, and you've got two, records, and one of them is supposed to be the record that everybody trusts, and the other one is a duplicate of that, and they may not be the same. And if they're not connected, then that leads to all sorts of other problems from a data integrity standpoint.
Yeah, exactly.
Julia, you mentioned thought leadership earlier, and that can come in many different forms. Have you found any success with things like bylined articles, conference presentations, things like that?
We have done a lot with both byline articles and presentations. On the side of byline articles, we've worked with a local publication to do a reoccurring column where we can share our insights as an industry leader to their audience. And, we can also repost that on our website. There's opportunities to promote that on social media. I have found that, that content really goes a long way. On the side of conference presentations, we have focused a lot on education with conference presentations, and I think this has to do a lot with our industry as well. But we have some people in our organization with 20, 30 plus years of this industry experience, and we can get them in front of people that can really benefit from their knowledge. The key with these presentations is that the knowledge they're sharing is not brand specific. This is by no means a sales pitch, but this is a way for them to share their knowledge and get people informed about technology, or maybe it's water conservation, and share those tools and resources.
Yeah, and what I would say, Bill, is that what I've seen here is that even though, to Julia's point, this is not a branded presentation, it's not meant to be any kind of a sales pitch. It is a great way to, with thought leadership and in general, and specifically with these conference presentations, it's a great way to demonstrate credibility and knowledge, and that naturally leads to people coming up either, at the end of the presentation or after the fact, and reaching back out and saying, hey, I'd like to learn more about this. So whether it's intentional or not, and it's certainly not directly a function of this, but there does tend to be good activity that happens, good discussions that happen, and lead generation that comes as a result of some of these activities as well, even though that's not their primary intent.
Yeah, and then there's just a lot of, it's professional networking in a way, but it's also um, kind of getting your brand out there and getting your executives out there as people who are credible, and that credibility then of course extends to your company as well.
Right. And that's, like Julia said, I think the importance of having, a set of speakers that can go out and represent the company in that way. It's really important.
Of course, Julia, social media is an ever-present aspect of our lives these days, and it has to be used as a marketing tool. So, how do you guys at CalSense use social media, and what have you found to be effective when it comes to marketing promotion?
We definitely use it to present some of the thought leadership that we were just talking about, promoting the speaking events, promoting articles that we're doing. Podcasts is another great example of this as well. And there's some really great things with specifically LinkedIn, whether it's their advertising or boosting posts, because you can get really specific about the certain demographic that you want to be exposed to your content. These are all great ways to bring brand awareness and credibility to the right audience.
Julia, so let's move on then to market research. We haven't talked much about that yet today, but I do know that CalSense, and you were a big part of this, started its first annual Innovation Council last year, and in fact, I think the 2024 version of that is coming up here in the next few weeks. Can you talk about what that is and how you built it out?
So the Innovation Council is similar to what other organizations have for maybe it's an advisory council or advisory board. And it's a way for us to pull together groups of customers from each of our target markets and bring them together, whether it's physically in a meeting room or even virtually now is a great option to open up the conversation for feedback on our products, on our services, to run ideas by them, whether it's product development or messaging. So there's a lot of value from that in all of the data that we can collect. But another great value out of the Innovation Council that I have found is the relationship building aspect. Being able to have this communication, it's an event once a year, but once you build that rapport, it's easy to then reach out to those individuals, whether it's for those champions of irrigation stories that I had mentioned earlier, or feedback on a specific update that we're working on. There's just been immense value to putting this together, and the process to put it together definitely takes a team. We had product management and marketing and really the customer-facing team involved for the recruitment of pulling together individuals that we thought would bring a lot of value to these conversations and, kind of explaining what it is, getting them to participate, and the recruiting gets easier and easier as the years go on. So it's been a great tool for CalSense.
Yeah, I would agree. I've been witness to that as well, and in fact, I've seen this at multiple other companies that I've been with in the past also, and it's just a great way to capture customer feedback and get new ideas and get them to help vet ideas that you're working on and that sort of thing. So, how about other forms of market research? What else have you seen work well?
In the past, we have used third-party research. This has been a great tool because with Innovation Council, it's us directly in front of them. Our audience, our customers know exactly who they're talking to. With third party, we can bring them in, provide them contact information, and there's a benefit there because people might be a little more inclined to be sometimes brutally honest, which is really beneficial for some of the feedback that we're trying to get. So by using a third party as opposed to just a CalSense employee interviewing the customer, it allows a little bit for separation. And, it depends on what type of feedback that you are looking for, but there can be a lot of value in that aspect of research.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are situations where having the research outsourced makes a lot of sense, and then situations where it can be done internally by the marketing team or the marketing team and other teams that might have a stake in hearing what those customers have to say. Obviously, facilitation is a big part of it, and so the people that are facilitating the groups have to be trained in a way that allows them to communicate without bias, and that can be tricky. But most folks are trainable so that can be the reality of what actually happens. And in my experience, like yours, I think, Julia, we can get some really great feedback from customers when we have a structured discussion in a focus group type format. And so that's been my experience as well. One last question on market research. So Net Promoter Score, can you talk a little bit about what your experience there has been?
I only have a little bit of experience with Net Promoter Score, and we had facilitated this through our software platform. And this pulled really great quantitative data. One challenge that we had found through this process is that by using our software platform to collect this information, we were missing another key group of people. Our software includes all of our end users, but there are other decision makers and stakeholders within, the buying process that we need to still reach. So it pulls great data, and there's, different ways to collect that information. So that's something that we've been working on.
And just for those listeners that may not be completely familiar with how Net Promoter Score works, it's a scale of 1 to 10, and people are asked to uh, provide their score based on their willingness to refer the company that is asking the question to a friend or colleague, and they score it from 1 to 10, and then a Net Promoter Score. I won't go into the details of the calculation, but it's based on that, and it's just a single question. Sometimes there's that question plus a follow up, which would basically just be something along the lines of describe why you answered that first question the way you did. But it's a proven method to get a really good sense of where you are viewed as a company by the base of customers that you're currently serving. So thank you for that, Julia.
Julia, you as a company have some interesting clients, right? You're sort of B2B, you sell to governments, local governments, municipalities, and whatnot. So, what have you found helpful in terms of working with and managing creative PR and government relations firms?
This has been really important to our marketing efforts, especially being a small team. We have relied a lot on creative agencies, PR, and government relations firms. And what I have found really helpful in managing these vendors is two things. One, a very detailed scope of work. I have found that when we are in the beginning stages of the relationship, or maybe it's the project, to have a very clear scope of work so that we're all on the same page. And then that provides a tool to then go back and check in. That kind of bleeds into my second thing most helpful is check-in meetings. This kind of relates back to the theme of communication, but having either weekly or bi-weekly, totally depending on what the project or, the organization that you're working with, is having those check-in meetings so that you can look at the progress of that scope of work.
Well, that's a fascinating answer, Julia, and I think that's going to do it for us today, but we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast today to share your insights with Mike and I, and continue to do terrific work there at CalSense.
Thank you so much, Bill and Mike. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Julia.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Growth, and we hope to see you next time here on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.